and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll start the meeting with the public hearing to approve changes to Chapter 2150 of the County Code of Ordinances regarding regulating the use and display and sale of cannabis and cannabis delivered or derived products in the county to address lower potency hemp edible products. Sagar?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Shagar Chowdhury. I'm an Associate Director here at Olmsted County Public Health. I just have a quick few slides here to kind of just recap what we're doing here with our latest update to our cannabis ordinance. So again, just to hone in, the focus here is really around low potency, and we're updating our language in our ordinance to encompass some of those requirements. So just minimum required updates. So just based off of state statute and as the rules around cannabis are approved. So we're going to have to register low potency retailers. So that encompasses about 120 retailers that sell low potency. So that'll be for all jurisdictions except Byron and Pine Island, as they've opted to do it on their own behalf. So also in there is enforcement and penalties. So we will be responsible specifically for any violations of our local ordinances, and then as well as conducting age compliance checks. So again, this will be housed in our environmental health unit within public health. They're responsible for doing tobacco compliance checks already, so they'll be following kind of a similar suit, and they have a handle on kind of recruiting youth and conducting these compliance checks. All other product compliance checks for these low potency products will be conducted by the Office of Cannabis Management, as well as any complaints for any of these establishments as well would be run through the Office of Cannabis Management. So really, we're kind of honed in on any local ordinance violations and or violations of those age compliance checks. Kind of above and beyond that base level in terms of ordinance language that we're proposing is a penalty for age compliance checks. So any sales that occur under the age of 21. So we followed exactly our kind of pathway for tobacco compliance checks. So the first violation would be a $300 fine. A second violation within a 36-month period would be $600. Third, within that 36-month period would be $1,000 with a 7-day suspension, and then a fourth would be a $1,000 fine with a 30-day suspension. Again, that's all within that 36-month time frame. So no registered. We also propose that, again, no registered low-potency edible retailer may allow on-site consumption unless it meets these 3 criteria. So again, the product must be purchased within the establishment. All consumers must be the age of 21 or older. And then retailers shall not sell products to obviously impaired consumers. And then the last one is just like, it's just building clarity within our ordinance, and it kind of builds off of the Clean Indoor Air Act as well as our tobacco-free workplace ordinance as well. And that's just prohibiting all smoking within the retail establishments. So again, these products can be vaped and can be smoked, although that's, again, not allowed per state statute, but it can happen. So we're just kind of hammering home that point. So with, did I just go back? Yes, I did. All right, so with that, I would entertain any questions. Otherwise, I would ask to open the public hearing.
Are there any questions before we open the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, yeah. I just have one. There's decisions made by the county director of public health and so on, denying an application may be appealed, and it talks about chapter 4000 of our ordinances relative to administrative enforcement and appeals procedure. Who are those people, or is that us? Is the county board the appeal body?
For the appeals process? You want to speak to it?
I can comment on that, Commissioner. We set up an administrative appeals process where we have 3 contract attorneys from Rochester that serve as our hearing officers. So basically, if there's a denial, it will go to that administrative hearing officer then for an appeal hearing.
Thank you very much.
Any others before we open the public? Okay. All right, well, I guess we'll open the public hearing. Would anybody like to speak for or against this ordinance? There's another chance if you want. Okay. Anybody else like to speak for or against? Third time? Anybody like to speak?
I would.
Okay, we got somebody online. Great. Go ahead and state your name and make your statement. Can you hear me?
Oh, me? I thought you were referring to the other person. My
Nope,
apologies.
I'm referring to you online.
My apologies. Can you see me now?
I don't think they, well, I don't know if they brought you, yeah, they're bringing you on screen. There you go. Okay,
Wonderful.
great.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Jesse O'Driscoll. I am a citizen of the community, lifelong Rochesterite, now on the Citizens Advisory of Transit. And I just wanted to say it is a challenging situation you find yourselves in, and I think many of us in the community understand that. The legislation passed in 2023 was not something that most of us expected, even many people who support the recreational use of cannabis because of its specific dictates on local levels. So we understand that's a difficult situation to be in. That being said, things might not always be as cut and dried for local governments as the states like to make you think. We want you to know that if you feel any reason that you might want to go about things a different way, there's a long history in this country of local governments jostling with state governments in order to bring about some sort of situational compromise or figure out what is constitutional or not. Whether it's Fulton County resisting the state of Georgia's efforts to control their elections a few years ago, or several other examples throughout history, such as sanctuary cities and states where the state government disagrees with them. So all I'm going to say here is if you ever feel like you don't want to do everything that you feel pressured to do, there is lots of support for you in that if you want to go about going things that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, any other comments? I'll say it one more time. Any comments? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Okay, thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I would move the ordinance, I believe it's 25 related to cannabis. I would move approval of that ordinance.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll entertain one more time for discussion. Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank Shagar and the Public Health Department for working on these ordinances.
Support for the public to know this isn't the first time we've seen and discussed all these requirements within the ordinance. We've had very thorough discussions. So, thank you. All right, next up, consent agenda. Approve the Olmsted County Board minutes from March 18th. Approve gambling permit for rideability. Enter into detour agreement 1058066 with MnDOT. Approve outdoor warning siren joint powers agreement.
Approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. All right, no discussion decision items. So next up, informational item, 2025 commercial property update.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Mary Heft, Director of Property Records and Licensing. Julie is going to be bringing forward the 2025 commercial update, and it is follow-up to information you received in a Friday report. This is going to be high-level information to bring you up to date on where we are with some of our commercial properties. If you remember, some of you have been here for the last 2 years. We've been searching for appraisers. We've had a very difficult time getting the staff. I've worked a lot, and Julie, we've worked a lot with the HR, trying to figure out a way to get more staff in Olmsted County. However, that isn't just Olmsted County. This is going on all over the state. So struggling with staff and qualified staff, commercial staff, has a special nuance, and not everybody wants to be a commercial appraiser. So I just want to make sure, if anybody wants a more detailed discussion or understanding of how things work in the property tax system, we are happy to meet with you at another time, or just reach out. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Julie?
Good morning, Commissioners. Whoops. Good morning. I'm Julie Hackman, the Associate Director of Property Records and Licensing, as well as the County Assessor. With me is Jason McCaslin. He's been with our office for about a year. He is the Deputy County Assessor and the Commercial Supervisor. You well know, last week our valuation notices and tax statements were put in the mail. People are now starting to see them in their mailboxes. We've gotten a few calls. You may as well, and so we thought it was a prime time just to give you an update on what our commercial properties have done, considering we've seen some properties with considerable increases this past year. See if I can mess this up. So the assessor's office, the job and what we do is heavily rooted in statute. A lot of what we do, the processes, the requirements that we have are overseen by the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And so we look to them for guidance as to our overall arching, whether we're in compliance. And we'll go through a little later of what I mean by when we're in compliance. There are a couple of notable statutes that we can point out. The first one you'll see on the slide is 27301. There's two notable pieces in that. The first one is that the County Assessor's Office is required to physically inspect each property at least one time every 5 years. That doesn't mean that we can't go out every year. If we have a certain property type that is leaps and bounds, lots of sales, changes in the market, that type of thing, we can go out more than one time in that 5 years. Statute just says at least one time in a 5-year period. The second piece of that is no changes in valuation or classification can be made after the Board of Review or the County Board of Equalization has adjourned. It's always in June, and this year for the County Board, it's June 17th. So you'll see as we go through this presentation, a lot of what we are going to stress is we want to talk to people before that time comes, because once that time has arrived, it's nearly impossible outside of tax court in order to help them address some of their concerns. The second statute on the bottom is 27311. This says that assessors must value the property at a value that represents what that property would sell for in an open market arm's length transaction as of January 2nd of every year. So you might hear us now in the future talk about our assessment date. Properties are assessed as of every January 2nd for taxes payable the following year. So for this example, the assessment that we just completed on January 2nd, 2025, the values established on that date will be used in the calculation of taxes in payable 26. So Minnesota is a current year tax state based on a value the prior year. This next statute is in regards to sales ratio compliance. Now, we could talk a long time on sales ratio compliance, but I'll try to keep it high level. The sales ratio for our office essentially evaluates the accuracy and the uniformity of the assessments so that we ensure compliance. And what I mean by that, the second line is it measures the relationship between the appraised value and the actual sale price. So for example, if a property, we have an estimated market value of $9,000 on it, it sells for $10,000, we're at 90% of that sale price, our value is. Inversely, if we have $6,000 on the property, it sells for $10,000, our sales ratio is at 60%. State statute requires that our ratio on each property be between 90 and 105%. It gives us a 10-15% leeway. Part of that reason is because when you look at it's a mass appraisal system. So when you look at a grouping of parcels, one would have to assume that if you look at a median ratio of all that group of parcels and say you shoot for a 95% ratio, 50% of them will be above, 50% will be below. So you have that 90 to 105%. A notable piece in this section of the statute is that our sales study is not necessarily what most people would assume it would be. When we take calls from residents, taxpayers, they talk a lot about current sales. in establishing the market value, something that just happened within the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months. Based on the procedures set forth by the Minnesota Department of Revenue, our sales study is actually up to 18 months prior to when we set values. So I'm going to give you a series of dates. October 1st of 2023 to September 30th of 2024. Those are the sales that we used to determine market values for January 2nd of 2025 for taxes payable in 2026. So it goes back to, by the time you pay taxes on that value, the sales could be up to 2.5 years old. So it's really hard for people to understand why we use sales so far back. Part of it is this process that we'll be having in April when we talk about the boards of equalization. People have the ability to appeal their value. Without that, if we use current sales and just went to using that value for taxes, there would be no appeal process. We are historians. We use values and sales that transacted in prior. We don't necessarily predict what they're going to happen in the future. As we talked about just a minute ago, the sales ratio has to be maintained between 90 and 105% of the sale price to comply with the requirements set forth by the Department of Revenue. And this is all over the state. It's the same concept for every county throughout Minnesota. An example, and this is an actual sale that had happened within the city of Rochester, a property with an estimated market value of $595,300, sold for $1.2 million, resulting in a sales ratio of 49.6%, far outside of that 90 to 105%. Although we know not every sale, it's mass appraisal, it's not a perfect system. Not every sale will hit between that 90 and 105%. But really, if we look at that percent range, that ratio or that value should have come in at $1.080 million, between $1.080 million and $1.260 million. Okay. So this is where it comes in. This is why we're in front of you having a conversation in regards to the properties. When we did revalue, Jason and his team took a look at the sales that we've had. If you take a look at commercial sales versus industrial sales, apartment sales, what I mean by going down a rabbit hole, we could talk a lot about sales ratio. One of the requirements of a sales ratio study to be a good study or to be an accurate study is 6 sales. You have to have a minimum of 6 sales before the Department of Revenue will hold you to the compliance of the 90 to 105. Minnesota still is a state where you have to value it 100%. But you have to have at least 6 sales of a property type. So let's say industrial property, and we're going to use that as an example, in order for them to issue any, if we don't meet that 90% compliance, in order for them to issue any compliance measures on us. Like if we were at 85%, they could say, we're going to add 5% to those values because you didn't meet that compliance. In the industrial, because we're usually somewhere around 5 sales, we usually don't have a compliance measure. But when you look historically at this year's 5 sales, last year's 5 sales, the year before's 5 sales, now over 3 years we have 15 sales. So now we have a study and enough sales to take a look at so that we can start applying what we're seeing in the sales towards the values. In this particular one, industrial properties was the property type that came to the top of the list, the ones that we knew that we were furthest out of the compliance on. So that's one of the property types that we focused on this year and taking a look to get them back into compliance.
Good, I'm sorry. Good, so.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get timelines straight in my mind.
Yep.
You said when we're out of compliance, let's say we're out by 5%.
Yep.
We had enough sales and the state says we're going to add 5%. What is the timeline for that to happen? Because you're valuing everything on January 2nd. Does it happen after you do that valuation on January 2nd? They look at your compliance, and then between that time and when the tax statements go out, they would have added the percentage if we were out of compliance.
They would have told us that in order to get in compliance, yes, we would have had to add that. So the timeline is we create the values in January. We send notices around March, right? So taxpayers would have gotten the notice. And then county board meets in middle of June. State Board of Equalization actually meets the beginning of June. So at the beginning of June every year, when the State Board of Equalization meets, Department of Revenue and their compliance officers meet, they would have come to a conclusion. They would have said, you didn't meet the requirements set forth by this portion of the statute. Therefore, we will order you to add X number of percent in order to meet that compliance. And it's typically in 5. So if you're at 89.8%, you're not to 90%, the least they'll do is 5%. So we always want to avoid that piece of it. And then the county board meets. So we have choices. We can either send new notices out to everybody, or they get their notification when they get their truth in taxation in November that the value had increased. Yeah. Luckily, we haven't gotten to that point. We haven't, since I've been here, we've not had that happen. So it's been a long time. So by doing some of this, we're trying to avoid that happening in the future. This slide essentially goes over some of the different property types that our commercial division took a look at this year and reviewed the sales that had happened and determined what needed to happen to our values to get them into compliance. Compliance meaning in line with what actual properties are selling for during this sales period for that assessment year. You'll notice that the industrial properties increased probably the most. We also had some hotels that we did, C-stores, meaning convenience stores, Quick Trips, Circle K's, that type of thing, restaurants, clinic space, and then fourplexes on our apartments. Fourplexes, actually, this is the 3rd year that we've increased their values double digits based on sales. And when we look at the sales coming in, we're still low. We're going to have to do it again next year. We're going to have to make that part of our revalue. So, do you have anything to add on that? In anticipation, knowing that we were making some very large increases to these property owners, we wanted to make sure that we drew attention to that point to these property owners to give them ample time to call our office, contest their value, do what they needed to do to be comfortable, or to get the answers they needed in regards to what that valuation increase entailed and was about. And so I think part of the Friday report, you had seen the letter that we had sent out to property owners, but about 3 weeks before valuation notices were mailed, we actually sent letters to 626 commercial properties that saw increases in valuation over 20%. The first probably week, we've heard from a number of different property owners. To date, we've heard 58 property owners as of this morning have contacted our office. So about 9%, which is not a lot. We're kind of hoping that with the valuation notices now hitting mailboxes, they'll take a look at both of them and they'll give our office a call and answer any questions. Conversations have been good in the conversations that we've had thus far. A lot of the concerns, I think, initially over the percent increase or the increase in tax, which has nothing to do with this percent increase because the taxes are based on a value from last year. But usually during conversation, when our staff has conversation, they go over sales, they go over the different concept, what process it is. It's not necessarily the value. They realize the values have increased. They realize that their value is probably not out of line as to what they might be able to get for it on today's market, but it's the increase that they're seeing that is causing more of the concern than the actual final value that was placed on their property. These are just a couple of slides about the different categories that we sent letters out in, and then the average percent increase for those people that are receiving. You'll notice vacant land is a big one on there. Our staff started this year looking at some of our land values in certain parts of the city, and that will continue over the next couple of years as we go through and do our quintile. Because we're required to revalue properties or view properties once every 5 years, we call it quintile. So 1/5 of the parcels, whether it's commercial industrial apartments, it also residential ag still falls in the same category. And so when you look at our overall parcel count is about 75,000. So we look at about, I suppose, 14,000 parcels a year is what we're required to revalue over that 5-year period. This year was year one in our 5-year quintile. So in another 4 years, the goal is essentially to hit every property type within the county, not just within the city of Rochester. So that's it. Oh, looks like. Oh, for Pete's sake. Okay. Anyway, as I'm hitting the button, this essentially, I thought we checked this, I'm sorry. As we check this, we just wanted people to know what their options were to appeal. Oh, all right, you get it back, please. Anyway, the slide is essentially what their options for appeal, thank you, what their options for appeal are. So really, one of the reasons why we're here is we want to give you the opportunity to understand what we're asking. We want to talk to as many people as we possibly can. So if we're getting calls, we're assuming you're getting calls. And with that, we just would like the opportunity to have conversation with the people who have those questions. So if you get a call, by all means, send them to our office, our staff. We have a staff of 5 commercial appraisers, more than happy to take the time to educate them, to go over the sales with them, to talk to them about the process, what happens now, what happens later, that type of thing, and to do some of those comparatives. You know, sometimes it's just a matter of the education piece of it. People don't understand, you know, what the requirements are of our office, where we find our sales, how we take a look at items, and our staff is happy to sit down and to talk to people in regards to that. So by all means, send those to our office so we can get those in advance, those questions in advance. If they don't find satisfaction with the answers they receive from us, on the bottom of their valuation notice, they'll see their options for appeal. They can go to their local Board of Appeal and Equalization. They are held between the 7th, I think, and the 15th of April. That date is at the bottom of their statement. About 10 of our jurisdictions are considered open book. They don't have a meeting to go to, so they go through our office and just talk to our office. If property owners wish to go to their local jurisdiction, their city or their township, and contest their value, they can do so. The local board will hear their appeal, their reasons for it, and then make a determination. They can raise the value, lower the value, they can keep it same. If residents are unhappy or not satisfied at the local board level, they can go to County Board of Equalization. So that's when y'all see the people in June when they come. So they either have an open book where they don't have that opportunity to go to their jurisdiction, or they've been to their jurisdiction and they still haven't received the satisfaction they were looking for. After the county board, I'll reiterate, after the county board in June, we can no longer make any changes to valuation or classification, and that's by statute. So the only option after that point in time is to appeal to the Minnesota Tax Court. And it's odd. We have until June to appeal locally, but you can file in tax court up to April 30th of the year in which the taxes are actually due. So they have up to April 30th of 2026 to file in tax court for taxes payable in 26.
Even if they skip the prior?
Even if they skip, yep, they don't have to go to any of the local board options. They don't have to call our office. They can file directly in tax court. Yeah. Residential ag properties, we very seldom see them do that. Many commercial properties, that's the direction, the route they go. Yep. And then the last slide, I usually show this slide at local board time or at the County Board of Equalization, but I had finished the slides, so we put it in here just so you had the information. It is a comparison between the estimated market values in 24 for page 25 and the estimated market values for 25, page 26, as well as the new construction that we listed for this last year. The change column on the right-hand side is actually, it doesn't include, we've taken out new construction in that, so it's the growth not due to new construction. So that percentage would be a little bit higher if we put that new construction amount in there, but we subtracted it out of there. As you could see, just in general, I know this is a commercial update, but just in general, you'll notice that agricultural properties went up about 11%. I would say 11 to 12% is what on average they went up for tillable based on sales. Industrial properties, about 17%, which goes back to the conversation about industrial properties being far below market value and trying to make those more in line with where they are currently selling for. Residential hovering still around that, 4 to 6%, depending on where it is. We do have pockets of residential that have that too, so you might receive some phone calls for residential. But that would be strictly based on physical inspections and revalue of property. Yep. Other than that, that's my last slide. If you have any
That's your last
questions, I'm
slide?
happy to answer.
Questions? Bob?
So how do you account for market anomalies in making these assessments? For instance,
Yep.
I'm looking at the graph that you provide. Parking lots show up to 260% increase. Commercial vacant land, about 250% increase. Manufactured home parks, about 140% increase. It's hard for me to believe that these property types would increase that much, even within a 5-year window, unless there's certain market anomalies that are driving the prices that perhaps might be outside the norm, like maybe a $5 billion investment in downtown.
Yeah. In regards to certain property types going up, most of the time, the properties with the staff that we had, we focused on the properties that had the number of sales that we had required to keep compliance. And probably maybe not a great strategy, but with the time and the staff that we had, we focused on the properties that required us to make sure that they were in compliance. Mass appraisal is not a perfect system. We recognize that land in Olmsted County in general has been low over a number of years. And so as part of that quintile number 1, we are working towards making sure that those now are in compliance as to what properties are currently selling for. So it's not necessarily based on an anomaly, it's partially based on the fact that those values haven't moved in a while, and we need to make sure that they are in line with what properties are currently selling for. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, basically a lot of those increases that you're seeing and referencing, those are responding to property values that have not been touched in quite a few years. In fact, we saw a couple that haven't moved since 2009, 2008, someplace in there. So when we're seeing those big increases...
Excuse me, Jason, can you use the microphone,
Of
please?
course, sorry.
Whoops.
So when you see those large increases, it's not necessarily an anomaly that's causing the increase. It's playing catch up from years of those properties being essentially overlooked, kind of like what Julie referenced, where with the staff we had available to accomplish the tasks that were required to complete, we would focus our efforts on those specific tasks in order to maintain compliance with the Department of Revenue. And unfortunately, with the size of the staff that was in the office, a lot of these peripheral obligations weren't getting handled as diligently as they should have been.
So you're saying that even though the county is responsible for providing an assessment within a 5-year window, these types of properties may not have been evaluated or assessed in over, 17 years?
There are a handful of properties.
And why would a property owner be responsible for that?
Minnesota statute doesn't give us the ability to phase our increases in. We're required to value at its market value. It is unfortunate that some of those properties are experiencing those types of increases, but the staff that's in place right now is working very diligently to perform our obligations to the highest of our ability.
So what measures could be put into place to alleviate the undue burden on these businesses that are all of a sudden being, assessed and looking at 260% increases in taxes?
Well, it might
Are
not,
there any accommodations that can be provided to these businesses?
Probably about 15 years ago, there was part of the statute that was limited market value, and it did just that. But what it did was it created additional inequities because you had two properties that were valued at the same value, and they were paying two completely different taxes. So the legislature sunsetted that probably back in 2008 or 2009, and did away with the limited market value. There is no nothing statutorily in place that incrementally increases the value. Minnesota statute says properties should be valued at 100% of their market value of what they would sell for.
Does the county have any leeway in adjusting that assessment, or perhaps, adjusting it over time?
We actually talked about that, and when we looked, there is nothing in statute that allows us to do that. So no. Yeah.
I know you talk about basing these on arm's length transactions, so you're not looking at, I'm selling to my kid, that type of thing.
Right.
But you're also kicking out those that are kind of leverage sales, so I own a fourplex on Second Street, Mayo wants to do an expansion there, so they're gonna pay me a ransom for my property. Does that get thrown out too, or not?
Maybe.
we verify every sale that comes in the office. We either contact the buyer or seller or both in many cases, and try to identify the circumstances that would allow that to be in our study or potentially kicked out. Ultimately, though, once we do our research, the Minnesota Department of Revenue again reviews our notes on the sale, and if they feel it's something that should be included in our sales study regardless of our opinions on it, they will leave it in. But we do make a diligent effort to make sure that the sales that are in our sales study are as reflective as market as possible.
The problem with that example, Commissioner, is that it's open arm's length, willing buyer and seller, right? I mean, that's considered a good sale. So if you have those in place, you have a willing buyer and a seller, you have somebody willing to pay that price for it, it would take us a lot to try to determine that that's a bad sale. I mean, you have two parties that one's willing to buy, one's willing to sell. Could it be just if you've got one of them, maybe it's an anomaly. If you get a couple of them, is it the start of a trend? You never know. One of the biggest things we heard this year, at least on the residential side, is, but I don't want to sell my property. I don't know how much it's worth. I don't care what they're selling their parcels for. And we understand that, but that's what we have to look at. We have to have those sales. Historically, when we look at it, and that's what helps us determine the value. So when I say maybe, it really depends on the information that we get from either that buyer or the seller. Sometimes if we can't get a hold of that, not everybody wants to talk to us. So sometimes you can call a broker and you can maybe get some information off that. But just because it's for example, a downtown Mayo's purchasing it, it's really a maybe. It depends on each individual transaction of what we find out.
I appreciate that. You think that fourplex on Second Street, and that's the one that value the same as if it was on 20th Street or out in Orinoco, or does location matter too?
Location's going to come into play. Yep.
So then that, in my mythical example, it would probably come into play for other
Property
fourplexes
type,
in that
yeah.
area, but not
Correct.
in an
Yeah,
area
it's
now.
about location. And it really comes down to what is somebody willing to pay in that location.
Right.
And typically, when you're looking at that, it's how much rent can I get on a fourplex in that location versus another location. That is gonna come into play when you're talking
So
value.
commercial properties, income potential comes into play.
It does. Mm-hmm. Yep, there's the three approaches to value. Yep, we look at all of them. Yep.
I've got a separate question related to what you guys do, but if the county wanted to, could the county set up a maximum increase in property valuations for properties owned by a certain segment of society? Like, my parents live in Naples, and if you reside there, your property value can't increase more than 3%.
Not that I'm aware of.
I've never,
but I don't know that for a fact.
I would caution you against pursuing that because that would create inequities in the assessment. If you see a property value increase and they're not carrying their fair share of the tax burden, so.
would prevent people from getting taxed on their houses.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
People going to Florida.
Mr. Chair, that's a state requirement, right? Not a county requirement?
I don't know in Florida whether it is, but I'm not gonna try to make a state law change, but
Right.
on a county level.
I think in California, that falls under a state requirement.
Okay. Maybe when you have some conference, maybe you could ask about that.
Will do. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on Commissioner Hopkins' question, at least as I think I understood it, because I'm not sure I understand the answer. So under like 27301, which calls for that 5-year inspection, if that doesn't happen, and I'm kind of believing that's probably a frailty all over Minnesota because, you know, through my other life, I just know how hard it is for small counties to find even an assessor to do this work, and it seems like it's the most hated job in the world in a small county where everybody knows everybody. But if that doesn't happen, the 5-year inspection cannot then, was it 27311, which provides for I thought the continuing ability to increase the values or you know, to reevaluate that property just almost by virtue of a computer program. That cannot happen? Is that what I'm hearing, unless you do that 5-year inspection?
No, we can't. Values do change every year, right? But the inspection helps us with any changes on the property, physically looking at the property for conditions and ages and whether anything has changed. So no, we can change values, but are we changing values to the extent they need to be changed if we're doing it from our desks versus if we're out in the field? So we might see smaller changes in between those quintile periods, that 5-year compliance, and we might see larger increases in those properties that we're actually physically inspecting. So just a little bit ago, I made a comment on residential properties increased 5-6%, but we had some pockets that went 10 or 12%, and those were based on inspections. So you can increase every year if need be, but we're still not increasing certain segments of the property. The other thing is when you do a blanket increase to a certain segment of property, let's say all industrial properties might not need it. There's a lot of different property types in there. It could be quarries, it could be manufacturing plants, it could be mini storage, it could be meat lockers. It could be a number of different items. If we have one segment, let's call mini storage. Let's just pick on mini storage today. If mini storage, we had a number of mini storage sales, and they were the ones that were throwing that ratio off because the majority of those sales were that's what we need to focus on and not necessarily do a blanket increase to everybody that falls within that category. That's what the physical inspection helps us do. We are required to look at it every 5 years. Mm-hmm. You asked if we were out of compliance. You're right, we've been out of compliance for quite a number of years, as have a lot of counties throughout Minnesota. Most of it's due to staffing with 14,000 parcels, and that's all property types in Olmsted County that we look on a given year. It's a lot of territory for a small number of people. We've now, with the support of the board and the support of administration, HR, we've created a commercial team that is allowing us to catch up and do our quintile work the way it's intended to do. Minnesota Department of Revenue, when they look back at us, and at the end of the year, we get a report card from them. What have you completed in compliance? What have you done on time? What have you submitted? All of that stuff, they look at all the functions of our office. One of those pieces is compliance. How many parcels have you looked at? Have you looked at your quintile, the number of parcels for your quintile? They took a look at the number we have, and they give us a percentage that we're over or under. I want to say last year, don't quote me, it's probably about 20% that we were out of compliance that we hadn't looked at over a 5-year period. So now it's going to take the next 5 years for us to get caught up. But can we do it in 5 years? Because if we're already out of compliance from the prior 5 years, catching up and making sure, we're gonna have to go through that entire 5-year process to make sure we catch all those properties. If we don't, and it's been a while since the state board, and I think we've had this conversation in the past, if we get to the point, and it's gonna be way more extreme than we're currently at, or will ever be at, I'll guarantee that, is that at some point in time, the state then kicks in and says, if you can't get yourself into compliance, we are gonna come and do it for you, and then they'll send you a bill to do it, to make sure that all properties have been looked at. Now, that's an extreme measure, right? You don't see that happen very often. I probably haven't heard it happening for probably the last 10 or 15 years. But it has happened to, like I say, to extreme amounts. We have staff in place now. We have a plan in place that this is year 1 of our quintile. So the next 4 years is not going to be easy. We're going to see probably some of these same increases, maybe not to the extreme as some of the industrial properties that we've seen this year, because as we talked about, that was the one that we knew was furthest out of compliance, so that's the one we tackled first. But we probably are going to have some more parcels over the next 4 years that are going to see increases that are going to be maybe out of the norm for what we have in the past.
Mr. Chair, can I just add?
Sure.
Perhaps this would just be a request to me, I don't know if the board, but as we get into budget discussions, I think it'd be helpful if there are things that the board ought to be doing relative to budget to make sure that this doesn't happen to another board 5 years from now. Maybe we ought to know about that, or at least have the recommendation we can accept or reject it.
I know that the past board knew that we were short of
Yep.
assessors. We just couldn't find assessors, so.
Right. Yeah, it took us probably 3 years to find enough staff, or to find the staff that we had openings for. Yeah.
Bob?
So, you know, I know that, you know, I can get a comp pretty easily. And I could do that from a laptop that would give me a sense of what values are of properties that are have been sold within a certain radius around me. Why can't you use that as opposed to individual assessments?
Statute still says that we have to physically inspect. There's no AI.
But you have to inspect not every property, but a certain number.
Once every 5 years. Every property has to be viewed once every 5 years. There is a caveat in statute that says that we can do desk reviews if we have the technology in place to do so. What that means is that we have to have, and there's going to be some technicalities that I'm not going to get accurate, but we have to have within, I think it's 5 years, street level imagery where we can measure and we can see there's certain direction as to what that street imagery has to look like. We actually have some street imagery from 21 and 22 that we had done, but here in the next couple of years, in order to use that for compliant inspections, it will be out of date and we would have to have those street imagery done again. That street imagery, we did the city of Rochester for the first round in 21, and then in 22 we did the small cities, and then we utilized the townships that were probably most closely related to right outside of the city of Rochester or the areas outside of the small towns, only because it's expensive. And we knew that by driving Viola Township, for example, we weren't necessarily going to get what we needed out of it. And so we didn't do the rural areas. So some of those caveats don't even fit to the rural areas. So we do have some parts of town. But again, that captures as of the date that that street imagery was drawing. So any new construction, any new updates, anything done to the property, we wouldn't be able to capture in that imagery. So we can utilize it. We just can't use it as our only reliance of data for our revalue. Yep.
Back in Jackson County, I was an appraiser there for a number of years before I took over as county assessor. And there was a property in Heron Lake Township that they had completely remodeled the outside of the house, and it looked like $1 million. I Went out there, I reappraised it, and, you know, I was not able to get inside the house. Went back to the office and completed my work, found my, you know, my motivations for appraising it as it was. And then the property owner called me back, and I got inside the house, and when I walked through that front door is like going into a time machine where it went back to, you know, the 1900s when it was built. So obviously I adjusted the value down. I apologize for the abbreviated story, but the point that I was trying to make is that on-site physical inspections are always going to be the best way for us to get the information. That it's very difficult to appraise a property by only having half the information. So
Fair enough, but I mean, even a Google Maps photo of a vacant parking lot 5 years later is still a vacant parking lot that's now 260% assessed higher. I mean, it's hard to fathom how that happens.
I'll just point out, I have a commercial property that got raised way up, but the way I look at it is essentially I got a gift for the last 5 or 10 years because I was undervalued. I should have been paying the higher taxes that I will be paying going forward. So as much as I don't want to pay that next year's taxes, I realize I'd be broker if they would have been on track. So I was happy you guys didn't have commercial appraisers for a number of years.
True. Very true.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you guys. Very. Oh, one more.
No, I just want to say, I mean, we can all bemoan the frailties of this system, but I can't in a millisecond bemoan the credibility of these two individuals in front of us.
No.
They are great, and thank you for your work.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Before you go away, Travis has something to say.
Well, thank you, Chairman Ty and Commissioners. I just wanted to follow up on your last comment, Commissioner Senjum, actually, because I can appreciate the situation we're in right now, where, you know, we've seen some significant increases to valuations for some of these properties, and I really want to applaud where we're at today. I mean, the work of Mary and Julie and Jason and the rest of this team to get us to the point that we're caught up is really something to frankly celebrate. And I know it doesn't excuse the fact that we were in this situation, but the challenge with assessors is experienced across the state, and to finally be getting to a point where we're getting caught up is something to celebrate. So I just felt the need to say that real quick too.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Now we're on to board and committee reports. Greg.
No report, thank you.
Dave.
I happened to attend an event at the University of Minnesota last night, and I can report that, and Tony knows this, we brought our German intern back to Rochester last night, and so I'll be starting probably today.
Great. Shel?
We had an extension committee meeting last week. Commissioner Mueller and I represent the board on that committee and heard reports from our 4-H program as well as our ag educator who just celebrated her 1-year anniversary in Olmsted County. And those meetings are every quarter, and in 20 minutes, they can't even begin to scratch the surface of the youth that are being impacted in our community, as well as the many new programs that Mary Nesberg, our new ag educator, is starting in the county, the new meetings she's hosting with just packed crowds at all of those educational meetings. A lot on soil health. She's helping some of our cooperatives with what they're doing, developing direct-to-consumer markets, and just bringing a lot of new information and education to Olmsted County. So we're in the middle of choosing our Farm Family of the Year. They'll be recognized at the Olmsted County Fair and at Farm Fest this summer. So just great things happening, and learned a lot at that Extension Committee and the impact we're having.
Great, thank you. Brian? Yeah, Bob?
No report.
Okay. I don't really have a report. I'll say that I was at Mark Ostrom's retirement party last week, and it was great, great party, a lot of good speeches, and yeah, big crowd, so it speaks volumes to him, and thank him for his 18 years. He's done now. He's retired as of today, so congratulations to him. I'll end with a very short quote from George Clooney. He says, "You never really learn much from hearing yourself speak."
Move to adjourn.
Adjourned, thank you.
I know, crazy. Yeah, he has access to a lot of things that we don't. But
Yeah, that's true.
he doesn't look like he's had work done, but still. He has, yeah. I don't even know how old of a man is he? Is he in his 50s, 60s?
Supposed to be that he was supposed to leave the U.S. when George Bush got there.
Oh, is that right?
Was he one that made that threat? Well, I think he does spend most of his time out of the country.
Yeah, I think he's married to a foreign.
Mom. I was like, Brian's hungry. Have fun, Mr. Chair.
Love that you kept the quotes going.
We're going to meet, I think, April 15th, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so. I gotta check because I was out of office.
Okay. I think that was two guys. No, probably not.
I think we're coming down.
Yeah, because April 15th was the board day here, so yeah, that's be down there.
Yeah. And so would that be the two of you or is that some of like a big meeting day? Or like
Check with Travis, yeah.
Okay.
Good seeing you.
Great to see you too. awfully complicated.